The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before Captain James Harrison as he guided the stellar Voyager through the uncharted regions of the Carina Nebula. 20 years of deep space exploration had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every nerve in his body tingled with anticipation. Something was different about this sector. The way the starlight bent around invisible currents, the unusual radiation patterns that his instruments couldn't quite classify. Captain, on detecting an anomaly ahead, reported Lieutenant Kira Wong from her station. Her dark eyes narrowed as she studied the readings. It's like nothing in our database. The energy signature is shifting. James leaned forward in his captain's chair, studying the main viewport. At first, there was nothing but the usual scatter of distant stars, but then he saw it, a shimmering distortion, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but in space. As they drew closer, the distortion began to take shape. "My God," whispered Dr. Thomas Reed, their xenophysicist. "That's not a natural phenomenon." Before them floated what could only be described as a ship, though it defied every principle of spacecraft design James had ever encountered. It appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal, its faceted surfaces catching and refracting starlight in impossible ways. The crystal seemed to pulse with an inner light, creating patterns that made his eyes water when he tried to focus on them. "Open a channel," James ordered, maintaining his composure despite his racing heart. "All frequencies." Before Kira could comply, the bridge was flooded with a soft, silvery light. The air itself seemed to crystallize, and in the center of the bridge, a figure materialized. James found himself face to face with the most beautiful and terrifying being he had ever encountered. She was tall, easily 7 feet, with skin that seemed to shift between translucent crystal and liquid mercury. Her hair floated around her head like living starlight, and her eyes, James felt his breath catch in his throat. Her eyes were like looking into the heart of a galaxy, swirling with colors that shouldn't exist in nature. "Captain James Harrison." She spoke, her voice resonating in a way that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his mind. "I am Zenara, last daughter of the crystalline dominion. I have waited a very long time for someone like you." James stood slowly, aware of his crew's tension. "How do you know my name?" Zenara moved toward him with impossible grace, her feet never quite touching the deck. "I know many things, James Harrison. I have watched your species grow, watched you reach for the stars with such beautiful determination." She raised a hand, and the air between them shimmered. "But you are different. There is a fire in you that burns brighter than the others." "We're on a peaceful exploration mission," James said, maintaining his diplomatic composure despite the overwhelming presence before him. "If we entered your territory." "Territory?" Zenara's laugh was like wind chimes in a stellar storm. "I have no territory, James. I have the universe itself. What I lack—" She paused, her galaxy eyes fixing him with an intensity that made his knees weak— "is companionship." Warning klaxons suddenly blared through the ship. "Captain," Kira called out, her fingers flying over her console. "The crystal ship, it's generating some kind of field. We're being pulled in." James turned back to Zenara, who watched him with an expression that mixed longing with something darker, more possessive. "What are you doing?" "Taking what I need," she replied simply. "What I have waited millennia to find." She reached out, her crystalline fingers almost touching his cheek. "Don't fear, James Harrison. I'm offering you eternity." The bridge dissolved into brilliant light, and James felt reality itself bend around him. The last thing he heard before consciousness fled was Zenara's voice, echoing through his mind like a promise or a threat. "You will understand soon enough. We have all the time in the universe." When James awoke, he found himself in a chamber that seemed to be carved from a single massive diamond, with walls that shifted and flowed like liquid crystal. He was no longer on his ship, no longer with his crew. And somewhere in this impossible palace, an immortal being had plans for him, plans that would challenge everything he believed about love, freedom, and the nature of humanity itself. James woke in a chamber that defied physics. The crystalline walls pulsed with soft luminescence, creating patterns that seemed to respond to his thoughts. Every surface held the same otherworldly perfection he'd seen in Zanara herself, as if the entire structure was an extension of her being. He rose from the bed, if you could call it that, a floating platform of interconnected crystal fragments that somehow felt as soft as clouds. His uniform had been replaced with flowing garments that seemed woven from starlight itself. As he moved, they shifted and sparkled, adjusting perfectly to his form. "Do you find your accommodations suitable?" Zanara's voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. She materialized before him, her form coalescing from the very air. "I spent centuries perfecting this space, preparing it for the right companion." "Where is my crew?" James demanded, struggling to keep his voice steady. "My ship." "Safe," she replied, gliding closer. "I've returned them to the edges of known space. They will tell quite a tale, I imagine." Her smile held both warmth and warning. "But you, James Harrison, are where you belong." "And where exactly is that?" He moved toward what appeared to be a window, only to find it opened onto a vista of impossible beauty. A galaxy seen from both inside and out simultaneously, stars swirling in patterns that made his mind reel. "This is my sanctuary," Zanara explained, her presence suddenly beside him. "A pocket of reality I've carved out between dimensions. Time has little meaning here." She reached out, her crystalline fingers brushing his cheek. The touch sent electric tingles through his entire body. "We can spend eternity exploring its wonders together." James stepped back, fighting the intoxicating effect of her proximity. "Why me? Out of all the beings in the universe, why choose a human?" Zanara's eyes swirled with colors that shouldn't exist. "My people were ancient when your ancestors first crawled from the oceans, James. We were powerful, eternal, and utterly alone. We had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself, but we never learned to feel." She moved to a crystalline formation that rose from the floor like a frozen fountain. At her touch, it transformed into images, scenes from Earth's history. "Then we discovered humanity. Such brief, burning lives you lead. Such passion, such intensity in every moment." Her voice held centuries of longing. "Most of my kind found it beneath them, but I became fascinated. I watched your species grow, watched individuals live and love and die with such beautiful desperation. And now you want to study me." James felt a chill despite the perfect temperature of the room. "Keep me like some kind of pet." Zanara's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Oh no, my dear James. I want to share everything with you. My power, my knowledge, my eternity." She gestured, and the walls around them became transparent, revealing an endless crystal city that stretched in impossible directions. "I can make you like me. Immortal. Unlimited. We could explore realities you cannot imagine. At the cost of my freedom." James challenged, even as part of him thrilled at the possibility she offered. "Freedom?" She seemed genuinely puzzled. "What is freedom compared to infinity? What is your tiny ship, your limited lifespan, compared to what I offer?" Her form shifted, becoming more human-like, yet somehow more alien in its perfection. "I offer you the universe itself, James Harrison." "You offer a cage," he replied softly, "no matter how beautiful." Sadness flickered across her ethereal features. "You say that now, but you have not yet begun to understand." She waved her hand, and a door appeared in the crystalline wall. "Explore my domain. Learn its wonders. When you truly comprehend what I'm offering, you'll see that this is no cage. It's liberation from all mortal constraints." As she faded from view, her voice lingered like music. "Take all the time you need, my chosen one. After all, time is the one thing we have in abundance." Left alone, James stared out at the impossible city before him. Somewhere in this crystalline maze lay answers about Zanara, about her true intentions, and perhaps most importantly, about why she seemed so desperate to keep him. As he stepped through the doorway, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into an elaborate web, one that had been waiting for him since before he was born. What he didn't know yet was that Zenara's obsession went far deeper than mere loneliness, and the truth about her interest in humanity would shake the foundations of everything he believed about his species' place in the universe. In the days that followed, James explored the crystalline labyrinth that Zenara called home. Each chamber held new wonders that challenged his understanding of reality. Some rooms contained suspended gardens where plants made of living crystal bloomed eternally. Others opened onto views of distant galaxies, ancient stars, and phenomena that defied human classification. But it was in the archive that he found his first real clue. The vast chamber stretched endlessly upward, its walls lined with crystalline matrices that stored what appeared to be memories. As he entered, they flickered to life, responding to his presence. Images formed in the air around him. Earth, seen through millennia of observation. But something about these records disturbed him deeply. "I see you found my collection." Zenara's voice drifted through the space as she materialized beside him. "Fascinating, isn't it? The entire history of your species, preserved in perfect detail." James studied a floating image of ancient Egypt, noting how it focused not on the construction of the pyramids, but on specific individuals. These aren't historical records, he realized. They're personal observations. You've been watching us, watching individuals. Very perceptive. She waved her hand, and the images shifted to show different faces across different eras, men and women who shared a certain look, a particular fire in their eyes. With a start, James recognized something familiar in each of them. They all resembled him in some way. "How many others were there?" he asked, his voice tight. "How many humans did you bring here before me?" Zenara's expression softened. "You're different, James. The others, they weren't ready. They couldn't comprehend what I was offering." "What happened to them?" "I returned them," she said simply. "Changed, perhaps, but unharmed. They lived out their lives with memories they convinced themselves were dreams." She reached out to touch one of the floating images. None of them had your potential. James felt cold despite the perfect temperature. Potential for what exactly? The crystalline walls pulsed with sudden energy, and Zenara's form seemed to grow more radiant. "My people made a mistake, James. In our pursuit of perfection, we engineered emotion out of ourselves. We became living crystals, eternal but empty." Her eyes swirled with intense colors. "All except me. I retained something, an imperfection that my kind considered a flaw. The ability to feel." She gestured, and the chamber transformed around them, showing a vast civilization of crystal beings, cold and perfect in their immortality. "But that flaw let me see the truth. We weren't gods, we were fossils. Beautiful, powerful, but ultimately stagnant." "What happened to them?" James asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "They chose to transcend physical form entirely, leaving me as the last of my kind." Zenara's voice held ancient pain. "But I discovered something they never did. Human beings carry within them the potential for both chaos and perfection, emotion and logic, mortality and divinity." The images shifted again, showing complex patterns that James recognized as DNA structures. "Your species is on the cusp of an evolutionary leap, James. And you?" She turned to him, her gaze intense. "You have exactly the right genetic markers. The perfect combination of traits I've been selectively encouraging across generations." Horror dawned as the implications became clear. "You've been guiding human evolution. All those people in your records. Your ancestors," she confirmed. "Each chosen, each contributing to the genetic sequence I knew would eventually produce you. A human capable of ascending to my level of existence without losing the capacity for emotion." James stumbled back, his mind reeling. "You're insane. You've been playing God with my entire species." "I've been saving both our kinds," Zenara corrected, her form flickering with power. Together, we can create a new species that combines the best of both, the power and permanence of my people with humanity's passion and creativity. And if I refuse? Her expression darkened slightly. You won't. You can't. It's literally in your DNA, James. Everything you are was designed for this moment, this purpose. Your curiosity, your resilience, even your defiance, all traits I carefully cultivated over generations. James felt sick, but his mind was already working, processing this new information. If what she said was true, she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd given him the knowledge he needed, the very thing that might help him escape. Because in her obsession with creating the perfect companion, she'd imbued him with exactly the traits needed to challenge her. As Zanara watched him with her galaxy eyes, James began to formulate a plan. She might have engineered his existence, but she'd also given him everything he needed to prove that free will couldn't be programmed, not even across generations. The crystal matrices in Zanara's archive held more than just historical records. They contained the key to understanding her power. In the quiet cycles that passed for days in this timeless realm, James studied everything he could access, learning the fundamental principles behind her crystalline technology, while pretending to merely explore out of curiosity. He discovered that her entire domain operated on a complex network of crystalline resonances. Each structure, from the smallest ornament to the vast walls themselves, vibrated in perfect harmony. It was this harmony that allowed her to manipulate reality itself, to transcend normal physical laws. "You're learning quickly," Zanara observed one day, appearing beside him as he studied a particularly complex crystal formation. "Most humans would find these concepts incomprehensible." "Maybe that's because you designed me to understand them," James replied, careful to keep his tone neutral. He'd learned that engaging with her desire for connection often revealed more than she intended. She smiled, reaching out to adjust the crystal's frequency with a gentle touch. "Your capacity for understanding was inherited, yes, but your desire to learn, that fascinating human drive to push boundaries, that's uniquely you." James watched as the crystal responded to her touch, its resonance changing to create a beautiful display of light and energy. "Tell me about the others," he said softly. "The ones who came before me." Zanara's form shivered slightly, a tell he'd learned to recognize as discomfort. "They were stepping stones, necessary steps in the evolutionary path that led to you. But they resisted, didn't they?" He turned to face her directly. "Despite all your careful genetic engineering, they still chose to leave. They didn't understand what I was offering." Her voice held a note of frustration. "They clung to their mortality like it was precious, refused to see the greater purpose they could serve." "And what purpose is that, really?" James pressed. "Creating a new species, or ending your loneliness." The crystalline walls pulsed with sudden energy, reflecting her emotional state. "Why must they be mutually exclusive? Yes, I desire companionship. Yes, I've spent millennia alone. But what I offer in return is godhood itself. At the cost of free will," James said quietly. "You don't want a companion, Zanara. You want a creation that will never leave you." The air around them crackled with power as her form grew more radiant. "You're wrong. Everything I've done has been to preserve choice, to create a being capable of truly choosing to stay with me." "Then prove it," James challenged. "Let me choose freely. Remove your influence, your careful programming, and let me decide for myself." Zanara's laughter was like shattering glass. "Remove my influence? My dear James, my influence is woven into your very being. Every cell in your body resonates with the frequencies I've cultivated across generations. You are, quite literally, attuned to me." And in that moment, James knew his theory was correct. Her words confirmed what he'd suspected. The crystal's resonance wasn't just a tool, it was the source of her power over him. Each crystal in her domain vibrated at frequencies that resonated with the genetic markers she'd engineered into his DNA. But resonance could be disrupted. "You're right," he said, turning back to the crystal formation. "I am attuned to you, which means I can do this." Before she could react, he pressed his hands against the crystal's surface and focused with all his might on changing its frequency, not through touch like she did, but through the very connection she'd engineered into his genes. The crystal responded, its harmony shifting, creating a cascading effect through the network. Zanara's form flickered violently. "What are you doing?" For the first time, he heard fear in her voice. "Proving that free will can't be engineered," James gritted out, pushing harder. The dissonance spread through the crystalline network, creating waves of chaos in her perfectly ordered domain. "You made me to understand your technology, to resonate with your power, but you never considered that this connection might work both ways." The walls began to vibrate, their perfect harmony dissolving into discord. Zanara reached for him, her form becoming unstable. "Stop. You'll destroy everything." "No," James corrected her, maintaining his focus despite the growing chaos. "I'm freeing us both." As the crystalline paradise began to fracture around them, James realized that his true test wasn't resisting Zanara's power. It was showing her that real connection couldn't be forced or engineered. And as reality itself began to bend and break, he saw in her eyes the first glimmer of understanding. The crystalline domain shuddered and cracked, reality itself bending under the strain of the dissonance James had created. Fragments of Zanara's carefully constructed paradise fell away like breaking mirrors, each shard reflecting different moments of time and space. Millions of years of work. Zanara's voice echoed through the chaos, her form shifting between solid and ethereal. "Why destroy everything I've built for you?" James stood firm in the center of the maelstrom, maintaining his focus on the discordant frequencies he'd introduced into her perfect system. "You built a beautiful cage, Zanara, but it's still a cage. Real love, real connection, can't be engineered or forced." The space around them continued to fracture, revealing glimpses of other realities through the breaks. Earth, distant stars, the vast emptiness of space. Zanara's form stabilized, but her expression held something new. Uncertainty. "You don't understand what you're giving up," she said, her voice carrying both plea and warning. "Without this domain, without my influence, you'll be mortal again. Everything I've awakened in you will fade." "Maybe," James acknowledged. "But they'll be my choices, my experiences, not the result of careful genetic programming." Suddenly, the chaos stilled. The breaking of reality paused, suspended in a moment of perfect balance. Zanara moved closer to him, her galaxy eyes swirling with complex emotions. "You truly would choose mortality over eternity. Limitation over godhood." She studied him intently, even knowing what you could become. James met her gaze steadily. "I choose free will over predetermined perfection. And if you truly want connection, you need to understand why." The crystalline shards hanging in the air began to pulse with new light. Zanara's form seemed to grow both more solid and more transcendent at once. Perhaps I have been wrong. All these millennia, all my careful plans." She lifted her hand, watching as reality rippled around it. "I sought to create the perfect companion, but in doing so, I denied the very thing that drew me to humans in the first place, your capacity for genuine choice." The suspended fragments of her domain began to realign, but differently now. Instead of a perfect prison of crystal, they formed a bridge between worlds. "You've taught me something, James Harrison," Zanara said softly. "Something my kind never understood. True connection cannot be engineered. It must be chosen." She gestured, and a portal opened, showing the stellar Voyager waiting in normal space. "Your ship and crew have been waiting in temporal suspension. For them, only moments have passed." She paused, her form flickering. "You are free to go." James stepped toward the portal, but stopped, turning back to her. "And what will you do now?" Zanara's smile held both sadness and hope. "Perhaps it's time for a different approach. Instead of trying to force evolution, maybe I should simply Watch. Learn. Understand why humanity's chaos creates such beauty. You could learn firsthand, James suggested, not as a god or engineer of evolution, but as a fellow explorer. She considered this, her form shifting slightly. You would offer friendship to one who tried to cage you. I offer the chance for real connection, he corrected. One formed by choice, not compulsion. The remaining crystals of her domain pulsed with new light as Zenara made her decision. Then perhaps, Captain Harrison, we should discuss the possibility of an alliance between your people and what remains of mine. As equals. James smiled. I think that could be arranged. As he stepped through the portal back to his ship, the crystal domain behind him transformed, becoming not a prison of perfect symmetry, but a nexus of possibility. Zenara's form shifted one final time, taking on an appearance that, while still alien, seemed more authentic than her previous perfection. Until we meet again, James Harrison. Her voice echoed as reality realigned itself. This time, by choice. Back on the bridge of the stellar Voyager, James watched as Zenara's crystalline ship transformed into something new, no longer a tool of imprisonment, but a vessel of exploration. As both ships prepared to go their separate ways, he reflected that sometimes the greatest gift wasn't eternal life or limitless power, but the simple freedom to choose one's own path. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, an immortal being began her own journey of discovery, learning that true connection couldn't be engineered. It had to be earned, one genuine choice at a time. The end.